Fuad Shukr was killed in an Israeli strike on July 13th, 2024, only 3 days after Maidal Shams attack that killed 12 Israeli children. And despite how terrible of a tragedy that was, it's not the worst thing this man has been behind. So today, or I think yesterday, Wall Street Journal has released an article about this person. We've talked about him when the strike happened, as well as the I'm not sure how far it was, but the day I think it was the day after, because that was a really good week. A day after, also Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Iran. But today we're gonna be talking about Fuad Shukr. So James, I think you were on an episode when we heard about the strike in Beirut where this guy has been killed. So uh, maybe just give us a quick reminder and just your first thoughts.
Well, just like the Hamas leader who got killed in Tehran, this guy was particularly evil. It's the kind of guy that a rational, good person will celebrate when they get killed. He deserved getting killed. And, we say things like that frightens people, it scares the horses or whatever. But no, this man was evil. Before Hezbollah came into existence, and officially it only came into existence in 1985, a couple of years before Hezbollah actually came into existence, he was one of the key masterminds behind the Beirut bombing that took 241 United States Marine lives. The Marines were there. One can
And almost 60 French military personnel. The
and
article doesn't mention it, but yeah, there were
exactly. Well,
also
I don't think
French.
they give the number. I don't think this article gives the numbers at all on the Beirut situation.
It did on the Americans.
Okay, well, good, good. 241 Americans and others, as you pointed out, dozens of French and other people were killed. Now, America did not respond at all to that. Did not respond at all. 241 Marines were slaughtered while Reagan was president, and we just, in effect, let them get away with it. We withdraw and hope at the time. Reagan's focus, the president of the United States' focus, was elsewhere at the time. But this man was the mastermind behind that. So for more than 40 years, he's been wanted as the criminal behind that mass murder, that horrific act of war. But more than that, after Hezbollah got founded, he's been one of these guys who's operated in the shadows, and they have intentionally tried to keep leaders like him operating in the shadows. But one thing we do know about him is that he was the key go-between between Hezbollah, Lebanon, and Iran. And during the course of his tenure as the liaison, if you will, between Hezbollah, Lebanon, and Iran, Hezbollah became much better armed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. They went from something like 150, I think says something like 50 and supplied missiles to 15,000 sophisticated, high-powered Iranian missiles that he helped coordinate get in there. So all of these Hezbollah attacks over the last 35 years from Lebanon, including the 2006 war, this man was responsible for coordinating the Iranian weapons getting there and killing people. That's why it was particularly poetic and eloquent that when after, at least a dozen children were killed in that bombing in northern Israel on a soccer field. Clearly it was Hezbollah's doing. Hezbollah denied doing that because it was so horrific. At least eventually completely denied it, doing it. And Israel. And then the coolest thing about this is how they actually lured out floors of a building in which he was staying so that he was more vulnerable to attack. I think I'm blown away with how impressed I am by Israeli intelligence, the sophistication of Israeli operations, both in Tehran, mind you, but in Beirut. And Israel has been, I think, effective recently in trying to do, they should have been more preemptive, as we've pointed out. They should be more thorough, as we've pointed out. But they've been effective against Hezbollah, at least in a targeted way that has to frighten these people. It really does. In any case, this man was one of the main masterminds. He was buddy buddy. He was like with BFF with the absolute leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, and you couldn't ask for a more evil guy to be taken out. And the way he was taken out has got to send a shiver up the spine of the bad guys because it was so well done, so effective, so, and as you pointed out, deserved it many times over. For the last 40 years, he has been killing people, American servicemen, Israeli civilians, children, up to just a couple of weeks ago, children on a soccer field. Just so well deserving of death. He is a monster. Was a monster. I can put the tense properly now. Was a monster. Has gone on to meet his 70-some virgin someplace. And hooray. And double hooray for the sophistication of the Israeli intelligence and military operations in getting him. Because this was a work of art. It really was.
So we'll talk about the sort of achievement of this strike a little bit later. Let me read the super chats just real quick. Thank you, Jonathan, for your super chat. Thank you, Aviva, for your super chat, and thank you, Bonnie, for your super chat. We also have a couple of comments. Best Monster said, I think Nasrallah cried when he died. And yeah, that's one of the points that article had mentioned, that Fuad Shukr and Nasrallah were actually really close friends and really good friends. I think one of the experts on the article has said about Shukr that he was a source of knowledge. Basically, he was this sort of like in the shadows figure, really giving the power to Hezbollah. As you mentioned earlier, with his contacts with Iran, he was the sort of the guy, basically the one who had most of the connections, or basically a key link between Hezbollah and Iran. As you mentioned about the rockets, basically, yeah, the supply of rockets of Hezbollah has increased by order of magnitude by the deals with Iran, as well as he was one of the key figures behind making Hezbollah such a dangerous basically militia group. Maybe just quickly also, so yeah, he also of course is the one who has been commanding the Hezbollah forces during these attacks on Israel for the last 10 months. So getting rid of him is going to create a huge vacuum. So far there's no one who could really, in a sense, replace him. And as I mentioned, I think article has mentioned it twice, that he is sort of a ghost. Like no one really knows about him. Not even people within Lebanon know much about him. So we have very little information about who he was. But as you mentioned, he was most likely behind the 83 Beirut barracks bombing, as well as the attack on the Maidal Shams. Something also interesting, he was a designated terrorist, or he was on the he basically had a bounty on himself. It was $5 million. So there goes my hopes for that money. But I'm glad whoever is getting the bounty, I'm still glad. But yeah, also Jesse had an interesting comment that I definitely want to talk about. He said someone in Iran is giving up info. There's no way they can do all this without that intel. So just quickly about the specific attack, basically the way Fuad Shukr worked is basically he lived and worked in the same building to basically limit any sort of basically not to reveal himself anymore. So basically, I think he worked on the second floor, and I think he lived on like the fifth or seventh floor of the same building, basically. And when the strike happened, the way it actually happened, as far as we know, is that he was working, so he was on the second floor. He got a call that he needs to basically go into his room, go into his apartment, and when he did, that's when the strike happened. So as far as we know, there has to be some. It looks like there is some sort of breach in communications. Israel has basically a lot of information about Hezbollah, what's going on. Something interesting I've read also. Apparently, Nasrallah has told basically his underlings that they need to get rid of all of their phones and basically not have any electronics with them because they are really fearing that Israel has a lot of information, can actually does know a lot. And I mean, yeah, if you also compare the information we know about the Ismail Haniyeh attack, I think we have confirmed that it was a bomb, but first we didn't even know, like the strike was so incredible that we didn't even know for a while how did it really happen. But I think we have a confirmation that it was a bomb that was in the apartment and it was there for like months beforehand. Um, so I think, yeah, it's most likely that there are people or we know a lot of basically information in probably both of these sites, both Lebanon and or Hezbollah and Iran, which is it's really nice to see. I mean, as I said, that week when this guy got killed and Ismail Haniyeh got killed, I think there was one more thing that week that was really great. I'm trying to remember. I think the Houthis attack. I think that was a bit earlier. I think it was the week before, but still a lot of really great things that are happening that were happening basically at the same time. Um, but anything, I'd have one more interesting question at least. Uh, but James, although let me just quickly read the super chat. We have a super chat from Crusader General, who says Nasrallah literally means she shat or she shitted in Russian. That's actually something. It actually means the same thing in Slovak. I was thinking about if I should ever bring that up, but yeah, it actually it means that in I think a lot of Slavic languages, which is pretty funny. But James, yeah, what do
No,
you think about this?
yeah, yeah. I'm not sure it has the same meaning in his own language, but the fact that Nasrallah, like you pointed out, what did he tell his operatives? Destroy your smartphones, put them in a box, bury them. He had a very funny statement that said, destroy them, hide them, get rid of them, put them in a metal box, do what's necessary, which is a confession on his part on how their electronic communications are obviously being monitored by or American intelligence, and there has to be breaches in that. And you have to be impressed at Mossad. Now that I've said all that, I think it's just been darn lucky. I don't want to know right now. I don't want anyone to talk about how they might have known right now. This is a case in which I rarely say I want to be ignorant of a subject. This is at least for even temporarily. But this is a case where I just think that someone who may have had a personal beef against this guy may have just gotten lucky. I don't know how they do it. I think it would be wrong if I did know. If I did have ideas on how they did it for me to eat so, wow, I am impressed at Israeli intelligence. It is incredible. It's powerful. Okay, I'll break my rule. They must have powerful inside sources, or they must have complete access to their communications in a way that is truly impressive. The article, as you say, called him a ghost. And it's been the intentional policy to keep their leaders in the shadows. So we don't know who they're going back and forth from. But there is no question that this guy was the operational leader of Hezbollah in Lebanon when he got killed. He was responsible for the death of at least a dozen children on that football field. He was the guy who's been masterminding these attacks. And remember, the attack started the day after, what was it, October 8th or something, that Hezbollah began their attacks from the north. I mean, it was within 24 hours or something that of
Yeah,
October.
and
Yeah,
something to remember also with that the original plan was that Hezbollah would most likely attack with Hamas. They just didn't communicate properly. And also remember the fact that the United States has sent I think what
Yes, and
what was
aircraft carrier.
aircraft? Yeah, that's right. They
And those aircraft carrier groups are pretty impressive. A single U.S. aircraft carrier group can take out most of the nations of this world just from its own military prowess. And so sending that in sent a message that they didn't want to, quote, escalate too much, but they did. The missiles still came from Hezbollah. They still attacked. And America did nothing in response to protect. But I think the limited nature of it indicates, and I think that, again, the timing indicates, as you point out by itself, forget the information we have about the coordination in Lebanon. The plan was for Hezbollah to attack itself and to join in on this two-front war. I think that was, to some degree, pulled back on with the arrival of U.S. naval, such impressive U.S. naval forces in the region.
Yeah, and I mean, just quickly, Nasrallah had a speech. I think I'm trying to remember if it was directly on October 7th or right after, but if it wasn't a military support right away, the moral support or whatever you would call that, but there was an immediate support. Basically, Nasrallah has came out and said, yeah, Hamas is doing the right thing. And he just didn't say we're going to join them on that. He just said,
well, if you're going to attack the next day, you're probably not going to warn them you're going to attack tomorrow. But yeah, he gave moral support and within, I think, 24 hours, actual military support. This guy, as I say, you want to talk about truly evil. If the head of Hezbollah is weeping and crying today, that's a good reason for all the rest of us to be celebrating and popping the champagne corks.
Yeah, and so something interesting you said, and I really like that idea that basically, and this is sort of a policy of Israel, that Israel rarely actually speaks about their operations. I mean, I'm not sure if they ever confirmed they were behind the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh.
Yeah.
I know pretty much the only time when they actually do confirm something is strikes, let's say within Gaza, or when it's a direct response to something. But any other time they just simply don't confirm, which I think is the right policy. I think there is a certain transparency governments should have, but there should be an understanding that if a military force, or especially if intelligence agency is to be effective, it needs to hold secrets. It needs to hold secrets from their own people. And I think that's why it's important that, yeah, governments are to be trusted in a sense that we can trust the governments. It's important for both, so we know they are not doing shady things, but it's also for security reasons that there needs to be a certain trust we can give into our government. So when there are actual, let's say, results from, let's say, the secrecy, we don't know if IDF or if Mossad or just Israel in general has any spies in this region or has any secret information. We don't know that, and
I think it was some lone Christian in Lebanon, part of the Christian resistance in Lebanon, who took him out. I think it was an Iranian resistance person in Tehran who took out the head of Hamas. Yeah, as far as I know, it isn't. And I'll go further. In times of war, the government has a right to lie, to tell outright lie. No, we had nothing to do with that. What do you mean? We had nothing to do with that attack. And we certainly don't have the capacity to do X, Y, or Z, even as you're preparing to do it.
James, I wouldn't even say lie. Honesty is not about not lying. Honesty is about being true to reality. You don't owe any sort of honesty or any sort of truth to these dictatorships. They don't have any claims to any of it.
I still call it a lie, but it's honesty. There are certain lies in certain contexts. When you're under a threat of force, lying to the aggressor is actually a commitment to reality. It's a commitment to the value of it ultimately. So yeah, no, lies under certain circumstances are the honest, rational thing, pro-reality thing to do. You're absolutely correct, and here's a case of it. And while you and I inferentially say how brilliant Mossad here and how wonderful the Israeli operation was here. The truth is, if Israel wanted to just outright lie about whether they did it or not, their capacity to do it, how they did it, I would say they have every right to lie and mislead these aggressive monsters. That's why we need honest politicians. That's why when there are elections in places where there is some free speech and some ability to peacefully control your government, why we need to look at the honesty of our leaders. We need to be able to trust the people who lead us into war. So if we elect a prime minister in the UK or a president in the United States, we need to make sure that this person's policy and their morality is correct, because we're going to be trusting them with the awesome power of military response and sometimes having to lie about it to the bad guys. Yeah, under those circumstances, we need to know our politicians are good people and that our system is the morally superior system. Only under those conditions, though, that kind of lying and warfare moral. We have every right to deceive the enemy. Just as a police officer, if he arrests a murderer, it's a common tactic. I was a prosecutor for many years. Common tactic: a detective gets the suspect, and he doesn't have the DNA or the fingerprints, but he will get the suspect in the room and say, we've got your DNA. We've got your fingerprints there at the scene of the crime. And it's amazing that, because that'll sometimes inspire, okay, you got me. Confession. Oh, sorry, we didn't have your fingerprints, but thank you for the confession. No, lying is absolutely a correct tool of the honest and the good when they're under violent, when their interests and rights are being violently threatened. Lying is absolutely a correct tactic in various contexts, including this one. That's why you need to have good government. That's why we need to particularly care about the kind of government we set up and the kind of governments we elect.
Yeah, and so since we're going at the end, I also had like something that was interesting in the article was that apparently, since Israel wasn't really striking into Lebanon, or specifically even into Beirut, I mean, when we heard about that this guy has died and that it was a strike in Beirut, which is the capital of Lebanon.
And north of that, yeah.
And yeah, and not in the sort of like the southern part where the
Right.
Hezbollah has the full control. Although they do have an influence throughout the whole country, they are in the actual government. Um, Something that was interesting is apparently uh, Hezbollah commanders, Fuad Shukr, specifically, were a bit complacent and basically didn't really believe that Israel would strike into Beirut, or that they would, for one, that they even know that they are there, but that they would dare strike into, in a sense, dare strike into the capital of Lebanon. And that brought up an interesting question because, whenever we talk about it, I mean, if you go back to the episodes we did on October 7th, we have argued for basically striking Hezbollah before they even do, basically preemptively strike Hezbollah and try to destroy their capabilities as soon as possible. There's an interesting question, and I'm wondering what you'll say, is the fact that, in a sense, Israel has been holding back, allowed Israel to do this strike. And I'm wondering if someone asks you, well, maybe it's working for Israel, the fact that it's holding back, because it can sort of draw on that impression and do significant strikes. I mean, it might not even be a coincidence that Fuad Shukr, the death of Fuad Shukr, and Ismail Haniyeh happened one day apart.
Yeah. But you know something, the context is that prior to October 7th, there were sort of implicit rules of the road. Israel won't attack in Tehran directly. Israel won't attack in Beirut directly. The UN had said that Hezbollah activities south of that river were unlawful. So if Israel fights back in southern Lebanon, they've got this international justification for it. Whereas if they attack in Beirut or Tehran, boy, that would be an escalation. And so I think the bad is assumed that Israel wouldn't go that and attack Beirut and Tehran And good for Israel ignoring what people had thought were the implicit rules of the road up to that point. But and it maybe because they assumed that Israel would obey those quote previous rules of the road, that they were caught off guard. That may be true, and definitely use that if they're caught off guard. But the whole idea that we should comply with these things and hold back just so that we can catch them off guard is, I think, poor logic, though. If Israel had been more aggressive and, let's say, less discriminating attacks in Tehran or Beirut, these guys might have a lot sooner. They might have been killed years ago before they could have ordered attacks like October 7th, like the Hamas leader did, or attacks like the dozen kids who got killed on that football field just a short while ago from Hezbollah. Perhaps we could have saved those lives before they were taken had Israel been not obeying the rules of the road. They should have been more aggressive about attacking Hezbollah wherever it was and Hamas leaders wherever they are. And that might have prevented a bunch of innocent deaths that have occurred in the last 9 or 10 months, it seems to me.
Yeah, that's what I think too. I mean, the matter of fact is that Israel has been in conflict with Lebanon 2 times. It has been in conflict with Hamas many times. It has been in conflict with many of the Palestinian groups in the area many times, and has never fully basically done what was necessary to end the conflict permanently. It has always been lacking. It has always, I mean, specifically with the case of Hezbollah and Lebanon, it has relied on the UN that they would basically do their job and would stay in the area or sort of, be this buffer, which has never worked for Israel. Whenever UN or the UN peacekeeping forces try to enforce any sort of border or any sort of area or any sort of peace in the in the Middle East or specifically around Israel, it has never worked. It always led to basically the enemy country just said, the UN peacekeeping force, you can get out, we don't need you anymore, and has attacked Israel right after
Right,
that.
right. The jihadists simply ignore the UN, and the UN lets them get away with it, in effect. So yeah, the joke of an Israeli peacekeeping forces doing anything like keeping peace is a joke. And besides, we know in this particular case, the UN is pro-Hamas, anti-Israel. That's their official policy, the official policy of UNRWA, apparently the official policy of the Secretary General Guterres himself. So, I mean, we know the UN's position right now on all this. So, yeah, that is simply a joke. And Israel has got to be more aggressive. And, it is interesting, though, to look at it. Instead of being a big indiscriminate attack on Beirut or Tehran, the fact that they were so neatly targeted and so efficiently getting at the bad guys.
Just to jump in, Ismail Haniyeh attack was very, in a sense,
Very,
discriminatory, in a
yeah.
sense that I think only 2 people got killed, Ismail Haniyeh and his bodyguard.
Oh, yeah. His
But
whole
but with
building,
the
including
with
his.
the
Yeah.
with Shakur, I think it was Shakur. I think it was his whole family as well
Yeah,
as dozens injured.
exactly. His whole family and many others. You're right. I think what they gave a number. It was I forget what the number is,
I
but it
think
was
it
his
was like
whole.
70 injured, and yeah, his whole family got killed.
Exactly. There were women and children in his family killed. I have absolutely no sympathy for them, but still, it was relatively limited and targeted to the thing. There were only dozens, including guy. I mean, no, with Anea, you're right. Why, God, how targeted and specific can you get? Right in the heart of Tehran. That's got to send a shiver up the Ayatollah's spine. I gotta love blocks away from government leaders meet. This guy was targeted in Tehran, and it was just him. But in Lebanon, you're right. It was that building was taken out. Dozens were killed, including this man's family. But you know what they did? They lured him up to the upper stories, like you pointed out earlier, so that when they bombed the building, he would be most certainly dead. The chances of him getting killed as opposed to injured or something, or giving it a miss or something, would be still, it was, even though it was more than just he who was killed, still it was a relatively targeted attack, and brilliant. And in that sense, it wasn't enough to justify. I think Israel is walking a tightrope in the sense that had it been less discriminate in either case, people could say, oh, well, now you've declared war on Lebanon. Now you've declared war on Iran, and there's going to be a full-scale Middle Eastern war. I think Israel themselves are coming right up to the edge of what they think would cause the international opinion to say, okay, well, Israel's now the one starting a war. And that's a shame because they haven't started the war. They didn't start the war 60 years ago. They didn't start the war 40 years ago. They didn't start the war 20 years ago. And they didn't start the war since October 7th. Everything Israel does here is in reasonable self-defense. And they could be less discriminating the way they bomb their enemies in Syria, Lebanon, Iran, Yemen. And you're right, what an impressive bombing in Yemen they had the other day. I mean, Israel is very effective. Their intelligence is super impressive, and they should utilize that superiority, that military superiority, and that intelligence even more than they're doing so now. Yes.
Yeah, and just quickly, just so people don't take you out of context, I do feel bad for the children that got killed in that because they are the only ones that are innocent. They are the only ones who, in a sense, didn't have any choice in the matter.
Well,
but anyone
but killed by the person who had them in that building where he was Hezbollah and working. The killer, the killer responsible for those children, is the Hezbollah themselves, and indeed Dad. Dad, who was living upstairs and working downstairs in trying to kill people, put his own family at risk. And so when I say don't feel bad, it's not that I have no sympathy for children who get caught up in it because children inherently are obviously innocent. It's that Israel is not to blame. We, the good guys, can't feel bad about that. Can't feel bad about that because we're not responsible. He is putting his own family, his own close associates at jeopardy. He is the one responsible for all that, if there are, insofar as there are innocents that were killed. Yes, thank you for allowing the clarification, but it's only a modest one, my friends. It's only a modest one. When they have children, these terrorists, I mean, you hear the mothers saying, I want my child to be a martyr in the cause of killing Israel, so you can know what the part of their motive some of these people are. But let's even assume it's not that. When you hear about children or others surrounding them, know that what they're doing is on purpose. As I say, it's part of their propaganda and strategy to get their own children killed. This is not something they don't want. They want their own killed. Now, they might not have wanted his own particular children killed, but understand they are the ones subjecting their own, quote, civilians, end quote, to all this. They're the ones responsible. And if you didn't want those kids dead, leaders, don't go around killing other people's kids. How about those dozen kids on that soccer field a couple of weeks ago? You don't do that either, right?
Yeah, and I think that summarizes the life of Fuad Shukr pretty well. He is someone who started the war against Israel. He is someone who works in the same building as his family lives on purpose. And with that, thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching. There's no reality show extra today, so just the daily objective. But we will be back tomorrow with both the daily objective and the reality show. I think I might. I think I even had topics, but I don't have them in front of me right now. But we already have a topic, so they should be scheduled pretty soon. Thank you, James, again for joining. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Be safe.